You're listening to Overwatch League Daily, your daily source for Overwatch League news, scores, and more. Here's your host, KickedTripod.
Good morning, Overwatch League fans. Here is your Overwatch League daily episode for February 22nd, 2018. Today I'm joined by Overwatch caster and analyst Matt Pixie Carroll. We're going to discuss yesterday's games. Speaking of yesterday's games, here is the scoreboard brought to you by patreon.com/OWL Daily Show. Stage 2 is finally here. We've got new balance changes, new players on new teams, and a brand new map pool. Can you tell I'm excited? Okay, yeah, I'm excited. Let's jump into yesterday's matches. Stage 2 kicks off with the Seoul Dynasty taking on the Los Angeles Valiant. First, let's start on Volskaya Industries. Seoul is on offense first, and after a fairly quick take of point A, the Valiant put up an impressive defense, taking Seoul to overtime before a nano-boosted Fleta on Reaper would lead the point B capture. On defense, Seoul would hold the Valiant and wouldn't even let them take the first point. We then move on to Nepal. Despite a shaky start from both teams on Volskaya Industries, Seoul really began to come into their own on Nepal, and they take the map swiftly 2-0. At halftime, the Valiant have yet to take a single point or map, a stark contrast to the Valiant's 3-0 victory over Seoul in Stage 1. After the break, we go to King's Row. After two quick support picks by Fleta, Seoul will take point A and point B with ease. The Valiant push back a little bit on point C defense, but ultimately the Valiant are overrun and Seoul completes the match with 2:11 in the time bank. On offense, the Valiant answer in kind with an even faster point A capture. However, Seoul would hold them just shy of the final point and go up in the series 3-0. On Route 66, it was more of the same.
NVD-Mac Fate taken down, and that's the rest of Valiant falling around him. Agilities needs the most epic Dragon Blade ever, and he's not going to get it. OT ticking, and that is going to be another point A hold for Seoul, and they will clean sweep this series 4-0.
After Seoul beat the Valiant, we went on to the Dallas Fuel versus the Shanghai Dragons. It's a new stage for the Dallas Fuel and the Shanghai Dragons, two teams that have had an awful first stage. There's been a lot of speculation about how the Fuel will approach Stage 2 with XQC back, AKM and Rascal added, and Mercy out of the mainstream meta. Well, to start, we see Mickey and Taimou on tank, AKM and Effect on DPS, and Harry Hook and Custa on support duty. We didn't see Coco or Chips in this match, and we only saw Rascal very briefly on Route 66. Also noticeably absent after his suspension was XQC. We start on Volskaya Industries, where AKM takes no time to acclimate to his new teammates, and the Fuel take a quick 2-0 map 1. As a side note, we saw Taimou on the Winston for this map. It felt surprising at first, but we actually see Taimou on Winston quite a bit in this series. On Nepal, though, we do see Taimou start out on the Roadhog. The Fuel keep their foot on the gas and take Nepal, and at halftime, the Dallas Fuel are up 2-0 without XQC or Coco. After the half, we go to Hollywood, where Shanghai would begin to show some life. They take the map 4-3. However, that would be all the momentum Shanghai would get, as Dallas would take a decisive Route 66 3-1. This was also the first time we saw Rascal for the Fuel, playing primarily Sombra and McCree. In the end, the Dallas Fuel begin to show a spark of their old selves and take the series 3-1. For the final match of the evening, we see the Los Angeles Gladiators go up against the San Francisco Shock. These teams are close in record with only one match and one map separating the two. In Stage 1, the Gladiators got the best of the Shock, taking the series 3-1, and with the addition of Fissure from the London Spitfire, would be looking to do it again. We start on Hanamura, where the Gladiators would get off to a strong start, taking the map 3-2. On Nepal, the Shock would take Village in round 1, and the Gladiators would take a close Sanctum 100-99. On Shrine, the Gladiators would continue their momentum and narrowly take the map and go up 2-0 into halftime. After the half, we head to King's Row. The Gladiators set a blazing pace, finishing the map with 3 minutes and 49 seconds remaining. The Shock got off to a much slower start and ultimately would be stopped just short of point B. It's 3-0 in favor of the Gladiators going into Watchpoint Gibraltar. On offense, the Gladiators would be stopped just short of the final point. However, the Shock wouldn't be able to make it through the hangar phase. The Gladiators take the series 4-0 and are now 2-0 against the Shock. I sat down with Pixie to discuss yesterday's matches. Let's just go in chronological order here. Seoul didn't really start Stage 1 as people had hoped. Overall, how do you think that they looked against the Valiant?
Seoul have really bounced back, I'd say. The new meta looks really comfortable for them, which I'd say everyone expected to an extent. But it's kind of nice to just see that come to fruition. And it does say that, well, actually, it's okay. I say this with some amount of temperance. It means that they're not necessarily the fifth best team of the Overwatch League. They're the fifth best team of the previous meta. And maybe this time around they will be making playoffs properly. Maybe they will be pushing for first place. Who's to say? If that is the case, though, then one does have to ask the question of, is this team too meta dependent to consistently be a playoffs contender? If the difference between making playoffs and not is whatever meta happens to be in, then, well, there kind of is a problem. It may not be a massive problem. I mean, finishing fourth in a quote-unquote bad meta for you is still pretty nice, but it does say that there's something going on there. I say that all with a kind of massive caveat, though, right? Like, that is all a very conjectural thing to say, and also it is far too early to really say that, oh yeah, new meta, Seoul, the boys are back in town, Seoul are going to make playoffs. But certainly from this match, they look good. Ryu Jahong wasn't underperforming in Stage 1, but like right now he is shining. And again, there's just a lot of things here. It's really nice to see Seoul just looking more comfortable. It's also nice to see that, yes, indeed, this is a better meta for them.
So let's talk about the Valiant. The Valiant obviously made a pretty big name for themselves, taking down Seoul in Stage 1. With this 4-0 kind of revenge match, do you think that the Valiant might be in trouble?
I don't know about in trouble, because they proved their worth in Season 1, and you can see in their progression from the start of Stage 1 to the end of it that their coaching staff and training regimen is clearly up to snuff. Certainly this isn't as good a start to Stage 2 as they would have wanted, considering how they finished Stage 1, but I wouldn't start sounding any warning bells until we're like 3 weeks in and they have no wins. And personally, I doubt Valiant are going to end up in that position. There are clearly things that need to be fixed up, though, things that need to be addressed, but I have the utmost confidence that Valiant's coaching staff will be able to identify and address those things, and maybe these teams end up meeting each other in playoffs. Who knows? I mean, maybe they don't. Again, I'm not saying that as a prediction, but it's like, Valiant are a team that, we know by the end of a season can look totally different than when they started it out, and these teams got to play a second time 5 weeks from now. It could be a very different result, or maybe it could not. Certainly Valiant have that potential.
Let's move on to the Dallas Fuel versus the Shanghai Dragons. One of the largest questions surrounding the Fuel in Stage 2 is how they will take advantage of their two new DPS players and the return of XQC. So let's tackle the changes one by one. How do you feel about Taimou in the tank role in lieu of Coco?
Taimou looked fairly comfortable. Certainly not as comfortable as Coco in the same role, but or indeed as Taimou does in his usual role, but he seemed like he could be an adequate fit. So of course the real test is going to come up against the teams that Fuel has traditionally lost to. That's where you'll see how well Taimou really measures up in that main tank role, but certainly the potential is there.
Okay, so Taimou looked okay, he looked good, he looked comfortable. What about Effect and AKM as the new Dallas Fuel DPS duo? Are you a fan of this? Is this something that you want to see going forward?
Am I allowed to say I have no strong feelings one way or the other? The performance was perfectly fine, right? But this is really one of those matches where, much like assessing Taimou in the new role, we can't really glean much, right? I think we'll see more AKM for this exact reason, if nothing else. Fuel need to see how this duo works against a tougher team before they or we can pass much judgment on AKM alongside Effect. They're also going to be doing the same with Rascal, right? Testing him out here and there. So, definitely watch this space. And as the season goes on, the discussion about the DPSs on Fuel will get more interesting as there is more evidence and more results come to light. But for now, there's really just not enough information to discuss or pass judgment.
I'm going to get something out of you. Let's talk about XQC. Do you have any thoughts or feelings on, despite being back, not seeing XQC at all?
Look, we can speculate about disciplinary disciplinary action, all we like. And the fact of the matter is XQC is a controversial figure, which on its own could be justification to not start him. Maybe something is going on internally with regards to that. Maybe not. Ultimately, I feel like there is a more practical reason XQC wasn't played today. He's been on the bench for the whole first stage, and feel we're already coming in today with a role swap and a new player. It doesn't make a lot of sense to introduce another new factor to the team in having a player that, you know, you haven't actually played on stage with also being put onto the starting lineup, right? Especially when this is a team that is still trying to get up to speed with the majority of the competition. So, again, this kind of becomes one of those watch this space questions. Again, there is maybe an amount of speculation that with Taimou stepping into that main tank role, maybe they aren't planning on fielding XQC for a long time. Maybe not. Maybe there's completely different things going on. I think this is one of those cases where it's way too easy to look at what has been going on with regards to XQC and start, like, you know, almost like tinfoil hatting, right? Like, you got your cork board with like your pins and all your red lines linking everything together, right? It becomes really easy to see every single thing that this team does and find some way that it links to XQC. And I don't think that's really fair. Nor do I think it's at all likely. You know, it's Occam's razor. So maybe it's going to be that that's the case. Maybe that is legitimately the reason that XQC wasn't fielded. But until something is said and there are perfectly reasonable explanations for him to not be being fielded that have nothing to do with any of what's been going on publicly, I think we have to look at what those other reasons are. And I think we have to kind of ignore what's been going on publicly when we are assessing what kind of rosters this team is fielding.
All right, last match of the night is the Gladiators versus Shock. Everyone knows that Fissure is one of the best tanks in Overwatch League or the world, but not everyone knew how he would fare on the new roster, and there's language barrier issues potentially going on. How do you think he did in this series, and how much, if at all, honestly, do you think it improves the Gladiators as a whole?
Well, certainly Fissure showed his individual skill, right? Which was important, and that it proved to be enough to have them comfortably win the series. I don't mean to say he was MVP or anything, but certainly there was enough of a combination of skill and communication for things to go fine for the Gladiators. They didn't look as clean with Fissure as they could. The coordination is passable, but it clearly isn't 100%, and it's hard to say whether that's to do with language barriers or just not having played together long enough. It's probably a bit of column A, a bit of column B, but at any rate, both of those things will resolve themselves in time. The more you practice together, the cleaner you look. And, I mean, you can look at any team ever that's begun with a language barrier in esports. It always gets dealt with over time, right? Like, people start to learn how to communicate because that's just how you play the game. You know, you live in a country long enough, you start to learn the language full stop. When you just need to learn a small set of words to be able to communicate in a professional game, everyone does that. It happens constantly, and it is just a time thing. Gladiators are looking decent, and starting with a win when you're fielding a new roster is always a positive, even if maybe it wasn't the greatest test of your mettle. So I think, yeah, this is a Gladiators with a slightly higher ceiling than the Stage 1 Gladiators, and they're off to a good start.
So what about the Shock? I actually posted my Stage 2 predictions and had someone tell me that they felt that the Shock were a top 2 team in Overwatch League. I think it was a troll, but it might not have been. I love the Shock. I really enjoy watching them, and I'm rooting for them. But what is going wrong for the Shock right now?
The same things are still going wrong. They're mistiming things, they're botching pushes, they're each not quite pulling the same weight as their counterparts on the opposing side. This is a team that we've really seen come alive before, but it's such an inconsistent thing that I now find it hard to still give them credit for their good showings, right? Nothing much seems to have changed for the Shock, and something really has got to change. If you can only have moments of absolute brilliance that have you, winning maps, winning series, in fact, 5 to 10% of the time, and that other 90%, you're just not quite up to scratch. Even if you're almost up to scratch, if you're not quite up to scratch, that's still not good enough, right? Like, if by now you haven't been able to look at what you've been doing right when you've been winning and playing extremely well and replicating it day in, day out, then I don't know what to tell you, right? Like, something is clearly going wrong on a much grander scale with this team than, simple things like, coordination issues or, roster issues or anything like that. Or, even just, lack of player skill, yada, 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 yada. Like, there is something more endemic afoot with the Shock. I don't mean to say, by the way, that they haven't improved at all. They have improved. But every other team in the league has improved too since the start of Stage 1. Even Mayhem and Dragons, right? Like, it's true of everyone. And unfortunately, Shock are starting to look like that team, kind of like Dragons and Mayhem, that will forever be behind the 8-ball. And by the way, there's kind of a caveat to that with Dragons and Mayhem right now, right? Because they've got new rosters, they've got new players, and we still haven't quite seen the fullness of that. So, I don't know. Maybe Shock are going to prove me wrong. Maybe Stage 2 is the stage where they do prove me wrong, and I would love to see that. But it's not looking like that's going to happen, at least not based on this series.
My thanks to Pixie for stopping by on the show today. Make sure to follow him on Twitter at Pixie on the mic. Tomorrow I'm going to be joined by Overwatch caster and analyst Jake Xenox Brander to discuss tonight's matches. Speaking of tonight's matches, starting at 4 p.m. Pacific time, we've got the Houston Outlaws taking on the London Spitfire. Then at 6 p.m. Pacific time, we've got the New York Excelsior taking on the Florida Mayhem. Then at 8 p.m. Pacific time, we've got the Boston Uprising taking on the Philadelphia Fusion. If you like the show, make sure to subscribe on YouTube, iTunes, or your favorite podcast app of choice so that you don't miss future episodes. You can also watch or listen to the show at winstonslab.com. Don't forget, you can find links to everything at overwatchleaguedaily.com. And if you have a question or comment for the show, email me at overwatchleaguedaily@gmail.com. Thanks again to Pixie for joining me today. I'll be back tomorrow with Xenox for another episode of Overwatch League Daily.